Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm Ken McMillon, and tonight we're talking with Jerry Poje. Jerry Poje has a long history of advocacy, but how you doing, Jerry?
Fine tonight, Ken. Thank you.
Okay, welcome aboard. Glad to have you on our show. I see that you have a PhD behind your name. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Ken, I've worked long and hard in the field of environmental health and justice, and I see my current work in Fairfax County as an extension of that. The field of environmental health is focused on how do we meet the basic needs of everybody and sustain our planet. And for me, at this moment in time, safe, accessible, and affordable housing is an essential need in our county, and I'm devoted towards making that happen.
That's interesting. I believe the first time I met you was some years ago when you were the chair for a nonprofit named FACES. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. 16 years ago, I had the privilege of working within FACET's board leadership. I was a board member at that time when the county had just suffered such a terrible tragedy as having two of our citizens who were at that time homeless freeze to death in the winter on the streets of the county. It shocked me that I was living in a community where such cold-heartedness could result in death of people who really didn't deserve to die in such a horrible way. So I committed myself towards ending and preventing homelessness, and that led to pursuing affordable, accessible homes for all.
Now, you talk about affordable and accessible homes. You want to clarify that because we seem to have a housing deficit here in the county of 1.1 million people, but yet we still have a homeless problem and we still have a lack of proper housing for people. What do you think is the root cause of that?
Well, I think the root causes are many, but I would also urge that our listening audience appreciate the terrible facts that, when we did a county-wide strategic plan for affordable housing just a few years ago, we ascertained that we were missing 31,000 affordable rental units in the county, and that we had coming towards us an additional 15,000 unit need, which means that anybody who is in a rental or an affordable home is under a high pressure because the costs oftentimes greatly exceed their incomes to be able to live as they serve Fairfax County.
Now, you talk about incomes for housing. I get this little acronym thrown around a lot, the area median income. You want to clarify that for our users?
Yeah, let me give a little bit of context for that. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, the very large federal agency that seeks to ensure homes for all, it would say that if you're spending more than a third of your revenue, your salary, your income on housing, you're housing burdened. And if you're spending more than 50% of what you earned for your housing, you're extremely housing burdened. So in a county with an average median income above $100,000, not all people in Fairfax County earn $100,000. So we have a lot of our essential workforce, the people we meet every day in our retail businesses and in our schools and in our public safety, who aren't making those salaries, yet they perform essential services.
Okay, let's walk this back a little bit. So when we talk about people that live in our county and they're not being able to afford this and they're making up to $100,000 a year, exactly what part of the population are we talking about when we draw that? Are we talking about our police officers, our teachers, our fire department? You want to dive a little deeper into that?
Let me look a little bit more closely, maybe to help clarify for people. One of the reasons why my wife and I moved into Fairfax County was because we were anticipating someday we'd have a child, and we wanted to live in a place that had a very good school. So, yes, we did eventually move from Montgomery County to Fairfax into a place that had one of the highest ratings for an elementary school, a 25-year veteran principal. She had done a marvelous job in building a very competent school system. And we said, yes, we wanted to be here. Now, as I've learned over time, running an elementary school requires that you have to have principals, assistant principals. You need to have teachers. You need to have special teaching aides. You need to have bus drivers who would get children to and from the school. You need to have cafeteria workers who would provide the food for the children in that school system. Those were all essential workers, but it's easy for everybody to understand they all don't get paid the same salary as the principal. And I lived in a neighborhood when I moved in where we did have school workers living in my neighborhood. Today, the neighborhood is unaffordable to the 2 elementary schools and the high school that I'm within walking distance of. Those are the people who do essential services for us, but our housing in the very place where they do their work is unaffordable, inaccessible.
So are they actually living outside of the county?
Over time, this is the issue of gentrification. They've found better housing opportunities moving further away from our county. And unfortunately, as they found better housing opportunities for themselves, they bought the burden of longer commutes to where they work, and they bought a carbon footprint that is endangering the whole planet, as we all have to become worried about how much time do you spend on the road belching out carbon dioxide fumes. And in addition, because they have to travel longer distances, they can't meet their own children's needs like I had when I was growing up. I came home from elementary school. My mother was there doing the work that she needed to do to nurture her family. But if you're doing long commutes, you can't be there when your own children come home from school. So it's a very nasty system that is unsustainable if we want to build more beloved communities.
So now that being said, and we've already dived in a little deeper where it's an environmental type of situation, but when I was growing up around here, I noticed that there were a lot of garden apartments placed all over the county. And I see all of those have disappeared now, and they're now condos, townhouses. I remember years ago, Circle Towers itself was just being built in the 70s. It's now a very old building. There's a two-way street where you can't have air conditioning and heating run simultaneously. But it's a dinosaur now in these days. So what should we be doing? What are we not doing to keep the people who are actually working here in the county in the county? I mean, we have police officers who don't live in their communities. And if that's the case, how can they help their community and be aware of what's going on in their communities?
Yeah, I think you're raising a kind of common challenge about who belongs in the community and can we change the affordability such that everybody who belongs can actually live there. So it is in my mind, it is our long-term challenge on how does the county of Fairfax become a model for how we embrace everybody who serves, no matter what their salary is, to be able to live and raise families in the same community. In my own community of Vienna, Virginia, I can only tell you that if my spouse and I were just starting out as we did in 1990, moving into Vienna, we would be excluded from doing that, even though both of us have PhDs and are hardworking people trying to do for what is the greater common good. My own neighborhood is too high priced for us to consider that if we were just starting out in 2021, we couldn't find any affordable home as our starter home to move into. And that is the real challenge. We spend over $2 billion a year in Fairfax County for our education. How many children educated through high school in Fairfax County go off to college, some of the best colleges in the world, only to exit with a degree and being unable to move back into the neighborhoods where they were raised? This is a real serious threat to sustainability. And I'm hoping that we can grow consciousness to make a difference and change the equation for the better.
And you brought up a very vital point here. We know that a lot of people who actually live in the county come here because of the schools. We're told that we have some of the best schools and the education across the entire country. Now that says a lot, and it's a big draw. But if that is the case, and we don't have the infrastructure to actually house people, what can we do to mitigate that situation there? I mean, what can the people, the residents here do, the county do, so forth and so on?
So Ken, I'd say that's a two-part question. The first is growing the willfulness to recognize the problem. And that, I would say, is there are many people like myself. If I've reached my age in life and I say, oh my God, I bought into Vienna in 1990 with a starter Rambler home of $188,000 cost. And now I'm at my riper old age planning on exiting. I will have made a huge profit because that property had risen over time and I could retire perhaps somewhat more comfortably. But if I built a home where my own child, our most precious person in our lives, couldn't move back into the community where she was raised, that is an enormous injustice. And too many homeowners look at their property value as the most important thing, rather than whether their children and grandchildren could live in the same community where we raised them. So it's the issue of what are our community values and goals? And then your second question is really, how do we change this to make it more affordable and accessible? And I'm happy to say there are lots of ways of doing that, but it requires better policy choices and better leadership, elected and appointed leadership, to want to make a difference.
Well, now you just open up another window or door, so to speak. As much as our elected officials are trying to mitigate the situation, I'm pretty sure that they're well aware of it. A lot of them use that same platform to actually run for office. So that being said, before we had COVID, we were on a trajectory that would have actually done a wealth of good for the county in the regard of having housing. But now with COVID here, it would seem that to me that the situation has become worse because now we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the dollars, people are not eating, they're not, we still have a homeless problem. How are we going to advance in the right direction once we get out of the COVID era, if we ever get out of the COVID era?
So Ken, thanks for raising the terrible tragedy that COVID presents us with. It's been both a public health disaster, but it's also been an economic disaster. I'm hopeful that we have new federal leadership that really recognizes this for the existential threat that it is. More people dead from COVID than have died in World War II. The previous administration seemed to want to say this is fake news. It is so real and so pernicious, and it has had an enormous toll upon all of our local, state governments, as well as all the nonprofit communities that preferentially do the service to those with most urgent needs, including housing needs. And I would only offer to you that we could say there's a tale of two commonwealths with which to explore. The Commonwealth of Virginia, where you and I live, where our listening audiences live, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Commonwealth of Massachusetts 2 years ago passed a $1.8 billion housing bond initiative that allowed that state to vastly increase its investments in affordable, accessible homes. And just this month, Governor Baker from Massachusetts signed into law during the midst of the pandemic, one of the most far-reaching economic development acts of any state in the United States. And it is an act that creates vast new opportunities for affordable and accessible housing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The stark reality is the model is there. Virginia needs the gumption, the leadership, the advocacy at the grassroots level, at the appointed and elected leadership level to say, we're going to do this for ourselves. In part because I could just tell you this month, Amazon announced that they were going to locate 3,000 new executive jobs in the Boston area. And I would surmise, I don't have exact proof, that the affordability of housing in the Massachusetts arena is much more attractive than the less than affordable situation in Northern Virginia. And we've got to play catch up, and we've got to be bold and say, that's our future, that's our children's future, that's our grandchildren's future. We could do it. The model is out there. We can't continue to say, oh, there's been a pandemic, we have to stop doing everything that we know is needed to sustain ourselves. No, we've got to double down. We've got to accelerate what we do and how we do it.
Okay, now that brings us to another part, and I'm glad you brought that up. Here we are dealing with COVID, and our first responders, those who are either police officers or firefighters, but we have another essential part of that same narrative, the people who work in healthcare. So Inova is huge in Fairfax County. They're everywhere. And we know that they must be strained dealing with this pandemic. But where are they living? Where are the people who actually work for the hospitals, for the healthcare? If it's so difficult for them to actually buy or rent a place because we don't have housing that's affordable here, where are they coming from? And when we talk about a health issue, isn't the lack of housing pretty much a health issue in and of itself?
Well, it certainly is. And, I think you raised some very good points. There are some health systems around the United States that have recognized that for their own workforce needs and for their community needs, if you want to reduce the cost of healthcare for the population you're serving, having people be safely sheltered in affordable and accessible homes is one of the greatest contributions to that population's health that you could do. If you want to have a sustainable workforce, having people live close to their workplace is an essential component to the economic and emergency solutions needs that you might have. So Fairfax Inova has some amazing property in the Merrifield area that creates one of the best health system infrastructures in the region. And it has enormous property that could be better developed, in my humble opinion, to do workforce and community housing. And by this, I urge everyone to consider all the workforces needed. Fairfax Inova doesn't hire their own Inova staff to do the cleaning of rooms in their hospitals. They put a big contract out. Those contract workers are as essential to yours and my health if we had to go into Inova's hospital for a medical procedure, as they are to the very doctors and nurses who might be on Inova's tax bills for labor within their own domain. We need to look at everybody who provides essential services in our healthcare system and seek to engage the leadership in the long-term sustenance of what we could do to better improve our housing status in the community.
Wow. So that seems to be a very big picture that requires a lot of work. There are a couple of things that I've heard. One of them happens to be this word called NIMBY. Can you tell me what that is and what does it mean?
So NIMBY is an acronym, NIMBY, not in my backyard. And it is, one of the oldest strategies of community cohesiveness that says, I don't want bad things to happen in the community where I live. It can be taken to an extreme such that we don't want any future development to occur. If we lived in a neighborhood, we don't want to make sure our children could live in the same neighborhood or our grandchildren could live in the same neighborhood. That's the dangerous side of it. It is being replaced more commonly in our modern era with the concept that communities need to promote a YIMBY movement, a yes in my backyard. And let me give you a little bit of context to that. I live in a portion of Vienna where all of the homes are single family dwelling units, meaning isolated from each other. They only support one family. That was perhaps a worthy way of approaching the world 50 to 60 years ago in a suburban Fairfax County. But Fairfax County is the largest, most dense, most populated community in the greater Washington area. From an economic standpoint, it's the engine of the region. And if we think the 1950s, 1960 model of housing is what we need to sustain ourselves, we're fooling ourselves. Go talk to anybody who's 20 or 30 years old. They're looking for a more vibrant, much more urbanized look to the communities where they want to live. They want things that are happening and far more inclusive than we would have had in the 1950s Leave It to Beaver mentality of what a home was all about. And I say that because I have a 28-year-old daughter, and she'll tell me she doesn't want to live in only the kind of neighborhood where she was raised. She'd love to see duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes. She'd want to see mixed-use buildings and have the social amenities that comes from having a community of much greater economic diversity and cultural diversity. And that means building differently for the future.
Okay, so that's going to lead us to a break. We're going to take a few moments here to get together. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the ideas and challenges that would permit a better society and make housing a little bit more affordable. I'm sure you got some ideas to that respect. See you in a bit.
Hey, chat. Why do I wear a mask? Because when I'm not behind the screen, my mask is my cheat code. And when we stop the spread, we level up. What's the next level? Hanging with friends again. You're right, masks have always been a part of our community. I miss you guys too. Being face to face is truly the next level. Here's the cheat code. Stop the spread of corona. Mask up, America.
Opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything.
I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor.
If making my detox public is gonna help somebody, I'm all for it. I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
America, land of the free. It's at the core of who we are. Freedom. The freedom to live without fear, to drive through all 50 states, to sleep safely in our own beds, the freedom to jog where we please, to watch birds in the park, to wear a hoodie, the freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because no matter your religion, gender, disability, age, race, all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things.
2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks.
Yesterday, I tried again by dividing a pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school.
Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
I work out every day. COVID won't kill me.
I'm 24. COVID won't kill me.
I have antibodies. COVID won't kill me.
It's been a long week. COVID won't kill me.
I'm 25. COVID won't kill me.
I'm partying outside. COVID won't kill me.
I don't need to wear a mask around my friends. COVID won't kill me.
I'm 23. COVID won't kill me.
If I haven't gotten it yet,
COVID won't kill me. I'm young. COVID won't kill me.
Famous last words. Don't let them be yours. Socially distance. Mask up, America.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. My name's Ken McMillon, and I'm here with our guest, Jerry Poje. Happy to have you aboard, Jerry. We talked about some very critical things in our first segment of the show, and we'd like to address some of the solutions that are possible. So we know we have an issue here with COVID, and we know it has made a dramatic impact on everyone, not just in our county, but across the country as well as the entire world. What do you think that we can do? As a matter of fact, we now have a new president, and I heard a rumor that he's signed some executive orders to mitigate some of the issues that we have. Do you know anything about that?
I do a little bit. I've been following this keenly because many of us have been hopeful for a stronger partnership from the federal level. But let's just look at our personal situation right now. When I've been on the Inside Scoop, in the not too distant past, I was in a studio sitting face to face with a host and having a conversation that is different than what we're doing today, zooming into my home and your home and trying to have the engineers bring our conversation to the larger community. COVID has changed everything, and it's changed it in so many ways that we really have to both move forward through the COVID challenge, but also be reflective about lessons that we're learning over a year. It's only been a year ago that we had our first cases of COVID in the United States, and now we're sadly confronting over 400,000 plus Americans dead and millions exposed to the virus. We're hopeful that an age of vaccination is soon upon us, but we've also had to cope with how many people have lost employment because you could no longer go to a restaurant, hop on an airplane, do the retail work that you would have done in the past, attend schools as you would have done a year ago. All of that has changed dramatically, and we now are having better analysis of what has been done with the CARES Act funding that was provided in 2020, and we're anticipating applying $25 billion new dollars for rental assistance from the December COVID relief bill, and anticipating a new $1.9 trillion in a Biden administration COVID relief package, but that may be signed into law within the next few weeks because it's urgently needed. I would like us to be thoughtful about some of the lessons that we've learned. There are barriers that we've seen happen in rental assistance. Thousands of households across the Commonwealth have been under threat of eviction for non-payment of rent, but we don't know exactly how to meet those with most urgent needs, how to develop a simple application process, how to define eligibility requirements. Most at risk first is generally what we would want people to have. How do we deal with the staffing needs that are essential for all the government entities and the nonprofit entities? How do we make sure materials are available in a variety of languages and formats? How much of a digital divide do we have in lower income communities that put them, while at greatest need, at greatest risk for not being able to access rental assistance? How do we deal with taxation during this time? Do we make a preferential real estate tax relief for those who are serving those people who are in most need of affordable homes, such that they continue to provide affordable homes? Can we create a regional acquisition fund, a fund that would preserve the most at-risk market affordable housing? I've heard, Ken, that you serve on a preservation task force. This is an essential issue. We not only need to build 45,000 plus new affordable dwelling units, we need to preserve every one that is already affordable when we know they're under threat. So these are some of the central issues that I'm happy to say people are identifying, exploring, and starting to lift up as we seek to better spend new taxpayer resources to make our communities whole.
Now, wow. So we, unfortunately, in the county, get our money from the state. The state, which in turn gets their money from the federal government. But Virginia has, and I forget how many different counties do we have?
We have quite a few. I'm most familiar with Fairfax County.
And so am I.
Don't ask me to pontificate outside.
But the point that I want to make is, would it be, and I got to use this word carefully, would it be honest to say that Northern Virginia has the greatest amount of people per capita in the state of Virginia than some of the other rural areas? I'm not saying that they don't deserve or should not get anything. I'm just saying, here's where the majority of the people actually live. You know, we're not spread out over acres and acres. We're pretty much in the, a tight closet, so to speak.
So Fairfax County, with 1.2 plus million people, is the largest county within the state of Virginia. And we're also an engine of the economy for the state of Virginia. And much of our sister counties around us, Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, Prince Williams, are also part of this larger engine of putting more money into Richmond than we take back from it. Every county is fueled by its personal property tax. So those of us who either live in rental units or own our own homes, on each of those is a tax assessment annually that provides the largest portion of revenues to fuel the programs that the county provides. We do get some return for our tax dollars from Richmond that help to do things. And we also, on the area of housing, get regular infusions of funding streams through the federal government. However, I would also point out that COVID has affected these as well. Imagine how much taxes the county used to get from restaurant businesses that now have had to close or provide only kind of takeout services. The business isn't as vibrant as it once was. We in Fairfax County straddle the borders with Loudoun for the major airport of Dulles Airport. How many flights are coming in and out of Dulles Airport, and how much cargo is being transferred hither and yon? There's a deficit in the workforce that has been doing that. And we've benefited over the years, and I know this mostly because of my work on the human services system, from the nonprofit community, who provides a tremendous amount of human services, some of it housing, some of it social services, counseling, some of it food programs. How many of those organizations have had huge deficits in their revenues? They can't hold their big annual fundraiser because you couldn't gather all the people that used to gather in a big ballroom in a local hotel who would help contribute the same way. How many faith communities hold Zoom services as opposed to face-to-face services? And because they do that, they don't have the revenue that they once had. So there's been a lowering of expectations and realities of how we sustain what had been a vibrant portion of the community. And how do we hold on until the age of vaccination puts it back to where it once was, or in some semblance of where we once were? That's the challenge at this moment in time. And, I just would again posit that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts provides a much more aggressive, progressive model for risk-taking that could ensure more affordable and accessible homes for all. And we need to grapple with how we would do that in our Commonwealth and how we would do that in the largest county. My hope is that additional federal resources might allow us to re-entertain the concept of putting a penny aside from our revenues to infuse our local housing trust fund and to grow the better capacity for resources to preserve and create new affordable housing.
You talked about the preservation task force that I sit on. One of the things that I always wondered about is we've had a couple of malls that are pretty much empty. Fair Oaks Mall is one, and the other one was Landmark Shopping Center. Now, Landmark Shopping Center has been redeveloped into a housing bank, so to speak, with all types of affordable housing there, every level of dwelling that you can imagine, as well as commercial. Is it possible that we could do something like that with Fair Oaks Mall? I mean, the last time I was there, which was about a year or so ago, interesting enough, I used to work there when they first started back in the 80s, but I went there last year and I didn't see any customers. And I went there to buy a suit, and I didn't see any customers. I saw more people jogging around and walking around exercising than I saw customers actually going into the stores and shopping. And I'm pretty sure with COVID, it's gotten a lot worse. What could we do with that land and those buildings?
So any land, which is the most essential precondition for building more affordable, accessible homes in a high-price environment like Fairfax, needs to be looked at, especially if the business model has changed. I heard that Amazon Prime increased its revenue by $27 billion in the midst of the pandemic because so many people, fearful of their COVID risks, were asking for deliveries of essential goods and services through Amazon Prime. Well, who is losing when Amazon Prime does all of that work? It certainly is going to be places that were once the vision of suburban development, large malls where everybody would congregate, go to the movies, get some meals, do all of the shopping, have 100 different stores to choose from in doing your shopping. That doesn't happen. It can't happen for public health reasons during the midst of a pandemic. The other one, though, that I would urge you and your audience to think about is the situation with hotels and motels. Now, hotels and motels are already built to provide bedrooms and bathrooms. What they don't have is kitchens. And if a hotel and a motel business model collapses, are these prime real estate opportunities for renovation, reconstruction towards affordable dwelling units? Yeah, we've already seen that Sheridan and Tyson's has declared they're not going to make it. If the county had the resources or had partnerships with the federal government and state government to do the very acquisitions that I urged us to think about, we might be able to create a whole new form of housing stock that could create ready-made diverse communities that could be sustainable over time and provide a much better insurance that people of all economic means can live and raise their families in the same common community.
It's interesting that you brought that up because a year or so ago, I went to Montgomery County and they were having this forum on housing and what they were going to do about it with, what's his name? Ehrlich, Mark?
He's the county executive, Mark Ehrlich.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed, because we talked about hospitals and healthcare, people diving into this to create homes and stuff. But the other side of that coin is financial. And there were quite a few banks that were getting involved and see this as an investment into developing property and developing it in the homes, because obviously their money is based on people who are actually living comfortably, that are not living in the street, that are not looking for housing and stuff like that. So that segue into what you just said. Why aren't the developers and the bankers investing here in the county to do the same thing to help with whatever the federal government could provide us? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do, and I think the news is good in some ways. It's challenging in other ways. When I attended the big affordable housing conference in Montgomery County, they had a whole panel of people who were bankers who did do the lending. And there are some very astute bankers who really have a consciousness about wanting to make more affordable homes for all. They're human beings as well. There was one fellow from Capital One, Ed Delaney, who really had a sensitivity about senior housing because he's of an age where his own mother's housing is something that's uppermost in his mind. And he wants to make sure that Capital One's portfolio of housing projects thinks complexly about sustaining communities. Who wants to live in a community where we boot out our mothers and fathers because they're no longer earning increasing wages and we want their property and land to only allow the richest among us to live there? That's a crazy idea. And I think there is an appealing aspect to trying to get banks to begin to think this way. I think we're going to see a new federal culture under the Biden-Harris administration, which is going to ask more of us in building better partnerships where capital will sustain itself by a broader sustainable vision of how to do things and how to make it work well. I think the same institutions, if they're only in it for short-term profit, they'll wreck the whole system. If they're in it for truly long-term profit, they're going to make it be sustainable for all in ways that is maybe not most profitable immediately, but long-term profitable. How do we get us to think in multi-generational horizons and not just into the next quarter's bottom line? I mean, Wall Street will drive them to have to do that, but we need to find the space within which to get people to be thinking more creatively and more long-term if we're going to solve this. And banks have a very important role to play because all the nonprofit and all the for-profit developers can only get to do what they want to do if they have the loans from the banks to make that happen. And the equation to do that is a real tight and taut one that makes it imperative that we do zoning ordinance reformation in Fairfax County to make sure that can happen rapidly with not too much encumbrance of complex rules that nobody can interpret. And that's underway in Fairfax County as we speak.
You mentioned two things that I want to tackle. One, senior citizens. Back in 2016, I read a needs assessment that the growing population in Fairfax County happened to be at that time, and I'm pretty sure that it still is, senior citizens. Now, when you try to look deep as to why that was, people were moving back from rural areas where they had moved to be closer to hospitals and doctors and grocery stores and things of that nature. Another thing that I noticed was that we went to a forum where we were to talk about the poverty level in the county. And this was a group of probably about 40 to 50 senior citizens there. And when we opened it up for a Q&A, the very first question from a senior citizen was, what about housing? So we know we have an issue with young people who have been sleeping in their cars while going to George Mason a few years back. We know that they are now not moving out of their parents' home because they find housing that's affordable even after they graduate from school.
Right.
But we also have at the other end of the spectrum, senior citizens who can't find a place to live and they're aging out. You know, how do we get people to understand that housing is not just for a certain group or ethnicity or a certain group of people who make millions of dollars? It's actually some of the people that we care dearly about, our mothers and our fathers.
Well, I agree with you, Ken. I think that's an essential component in thinking more broadly about the who of all the people with urgent needs for affordable housing. And seniors who are on fixed incomes, there are very few seniors that I know in their 70s who are seeking new employment opportunities and getting hired. They might be seeking it, but very rarely will you be able to access a new job if you're a senior. Even if you have great competency, there's a great prejudice against hiring people with that experience and skill set. But we also know we have people who have the young people that you mentioned, people like my daughter who live in Tucson, Arizona, because she could never afford to live in Fairfax County with a geophysics degree from a high academic institution. It is our tragedy that we don't have a whole community view of this, nor do we have a whole community advocacy. So I would characterize that there are very young, recent graduates from high academic institutions who are in need. We have seniors on fixed incomes who are in need. We have people with a multitude of disabilities. I mean, people who have visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, other physical disabilities. The spectrum of people with mental health disabilities is just ginormous. And each of them and their families are at high risk for us not providing sustainable, livable, and accessible housing to meet their needs. They've been born into our community, they've been raised in our community, and yet we're acting as if somehow they have to find special housing somewhere else to meet their needs. No, we don't have to do that. We can build it ourselves if we ask for it to be built, and if we provide the right economic equation for banks, for construction companies, for social service providers to do that work. And I know it's done elsewhere. I'd love to think that Fairfax County, in its current Constitution could become a national model for showing how this makes us all the more richer and all the more attractive for people to move into our area, particularly for businesses to want to move into an area where we care for everybody.
I think you've covered everything that needs to be covered, and it's interesting that we wind up knowing that one size does not fit all. We have a large population here in the county, and that population is diverse in ethnicity and is as diverse in its financial situations from one end of the spectrum to the other. The other thing that I remember is Amazon picked Virginia, Northern Virginia, to be their home base for housing reasons. And it's kind of interesting that we have not had them do as much as they should be doing for the county here. And to that end, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. You've brought up some very, very good examples of what we need to do, what we haven't done, and a vision to look forward to what we can do if only in the right place. Do you have any closing words that you want to say?
No, but if I only would advise our audience that if we want to build a more beloved community, each one of us needs to contribute to that. And there's a wealth of information that could help guide you on how you could personally add to the voices that says this is essential and I can contribute to it as well. If everybody thought that we are born into a world completely dependent for our shelter and our sustenance from our parents and guardians, we go through the arc of our lives where we're much more empowered because we're vibrant young people capable of earning our own way. We ultimately wind up at the latter stages of life moving towards greater dependencies. If we see ourselves as coming from dependency and going to dependency, we have to be dependent upon the whole community to want to make a more beloved community. And we have a role to do that at every stage of the game.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jerry Poje. Can I call you doctor?
Yeah.
Here we are at Inside Scoop. This has been an adventure that has been born of information, and we appreciate our guest. Hopefully he'll come back again, and we'll see you when we come around again, hopefully next week with a new guest. Have a good night.